All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're doing a deep dive into some major year-to-date headline news. We are looking at a massive, and I mean rapidly escalating, geopolitical crisis that's closing right in on the Ontario-Michigan waste corridor. It's honestly an incredible story. It mixes international trade, infrastructure emergencies, and how edge artificial intelligence is being deployed to solve a problem that is quite literally piling up by the minute. Here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the vital waste corridor itself, look at the two trade walls closing fast, redefine the actual problem, and then see how edge AI meets trash. Finally, we'll walk through the compliance firewall workflow and the massive potential of the circular bioeconomy. Let's get into it. Starting with part one, the vital waste corridor, or what I like to call Ontario's pressure release drain. To really wrap our heads around this, imagine the province of Ontario as this giant bathtub, a bathtub that is constantly filling up with municipal solid waste, or MSW. For years now, Ontario has relied on one absolutely crucial pressure release drain to keep from overflowing, which is an export pipeline that runs straight across the U.S. border, dumping into landfills over in Michigan. And guys, the scale of this is just staggering. Based on recent year-to-date data, Canada exports 3.46 million tons of MSW to Michigan every single year. Seriously, 3.46 million tons. That is definitely not a rounding error. What's worse, that number is actually climbing, up nearly 58,000 tons just over the prior year. To put that into perspective, this means that 14.35% of literally all the waste disposed of in Michigan landfills comes straight from Ontario. So think about it like this. Roughly 1 out of every 7 tons of trash buried in that state is Canadian. Michigan is actually the #1 trash import state in America, and right now, Ontario is completely dependent on this setup just to keep its own system functioning. Which brings us to part two walls closing fast. This supply chain is currently caught in a serious vice. So how did we get here? Let's walk through the timeline because it escalated fast. Back in February 2026, the old Section 232 tariffs were actually struck down. Great news, right? Well, the relief didn't last long. On July 1st, Washington flat out declined to extend the USMCA, or CUSMA, as they call it up in Canada, which kicked off a 10-year wind-down. Then boom, the hammer fell. On July 20th, Washington announced the first ever presidential use of Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930. We're talking Donald Trump's administration imposing a 50% tariff on roughly $20 billion of Canadian goods, going into effect August 19th. And crucially for our story today, wood and paper were explicitly thrown into that tariff basket. So suddenly, waste operators are staring down two immense financial walls at the exact same time. On the federal side, you've got Trump's 50% Section 338 tariff slamming cross-border goods. Then, on the state side, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is pushing to absolutely hike up landfill tipping fees. We're talking a jump from a tiny 36 cents up to $5 a ton just to deter out-of-state dumping. You literally have a federal tariff wall on one side and a state fee wall on the other, crushing this exact same corridor. And with that Michigan valve closing, Ontario is looking at a massive capacity cliff. We're talking domestic landfill space running out completely within the decade. Doug Ford's government has been scrambling, introducing Bill 5 to fast-track the Dresden landfill. But when you combine that with the expanding 2026 extended producer responsibility regulations and a looming 2029 clean wood landfill ban, well, Ontario is facing surging domestic disposal costs. Like I said, the bathtub is filling up fast and the drain is freezing over. So what's the fix? Part 3, redefining the problem. Let's look at trash versus biocarbon feedstock. First off, let's unpack Washington's actual rationale for these tariffs. Section 338 is an old, dormant law designed to target discrimination against U.S. commerce. In this case, Washington is pointing fingers at Canadian dairy quotas, asymmetric auto retaliation, and those March 2025 provincial boycotts of U.S. alcohol, not to mention Ontario floating an electricity export surcharge. The point is, construction wood isn't the main villain here. It's really just collateral damage in this massive geopolitical chess match over USMCA compliance. Which leads us to a fundamental mindset shift that operators need to survive this. Think about it. If a truck rolls up full of mixed, contaminated construction debris, it's trash, right? It gets hit by the federal tariffs, it gets hit by the state fees. But if you can conclusively prove that a load is high-purity, clean wood, suddenly it's not trash anymore. It becomes biocarbon feedstock. It operates in a totally different commodity lane, bypassing both of those walls and entering the circular bioeconomy. But here's the million-dollar question. How do you actually prove that right there on the ground? That brings us to part 4, Edge AI meets trash. Enter the Sentient Bridge. This is exactly where the 905 Wood Digital Refinery steps in. They are acting as what they call a sentient bridge between the chaotic mess of construction waste and the strict, high-purity demands of the biocarbon market. How? By putting the intelligence right in the truck driver's hand, right at the bin. They are operationalizing the Google Pixel 10 Pro running Android 16. Using the phone's Tensor G5 neural processing unit, the system runs a Gemma-class edge model on the Light-RT AI stack. It literally classifies clean versus treated wood in under 500 milliseconds, completely offline, zero cloud latency. The AI is doing the heavy lifting right on the chip, making the call before the truck even shifts into gear. Now for part 5, the compliance firewall workflow. Basically, manufacturing proof. Because having AI identify the clean wood is only half the battle. You have to translate that AI vision into an actual legal instrument. The Digital Refinery app does this through a really seamless UI/UX pipeline that generates a heavily encrypted, court-ready chain of custody. It starts with a digital request for quote. Then, based on that AI classification we talked about, it automatically generates a 9-point USMCA certificate of origin. It runs a verification pass and finally spits out a compliance PDF documentation output that is locked with Vertex ML metadata, layering your GPS, timestamp, and a cryptographic hash right into the file. This whole workflow is built on a really bold compliance thesis. 905 Wood essentially argues that clean wood waste falls under the HS 3825.0 residual feedstock tariff lane, which safely bypasses that Section 338 wood product basket entirely. Now, I do want to make it super clear here. This is an operational bet. It's a framework, not completely settled law or a final court ruling. But when you are standing in front of those massive economic walls closing in, this is quite literally the only provable pathway currently available to operators. And to prove that this feedstock is actually clean, the automated verification system checks everything against super strict Ontario Regulation 347 limits for leachate. It specifically ensures that levels of arsenic, lead, and chromium are definitively below the maximum allowed thresholds. If the AI rejects a load, it doesn't just get turned away. The system auto-files it directly to the Provincial Hazardous Waste Registry. It's a completely rigid workflow. The standard here isn't just probably clean, it is absolute provable compliance. Finally, part 6, the circular bioeconomy, where every regulation becomes a revenue stream. When you use this tech to completely bypass those trade walls through absolute compliance, all these regulations suddenly flip from penalties into revenue streams. Take Ontario's Circle Levy, for example. It charges $60 a ton for mixed wood, but only $5 for clean wood. That is a massive $55 spread. By using that Edge AI to guarantee a clean load, just one single 19.15-ton trailer avoids a $1,053 penalty. If you scale that up to a 50-truck fleet, you are looking at savings of over $200,000 every single week just by proving you're compliant. And the economic impact goes even deeper than that, because this clean wood is being actively diverted straight into the biocarbon market. Every single clean load generates around $2,674 in carbon dividend value through CO2 removal certificates, or CORCs. You're not just hauling trash across a border anymore. You're actively monetizing carbon on the open market. Ultimately, what we're seeing here is a massive geopolitical infrastructure crisis being transformed into a carbon passport for construction debris. Under the NAICS 5.1 classification, 905 Wood isn't even technically a dumpster company. They are an information data company that just happens to move wood. By fully operationalizing that Google Pixel 10 Pro and the Light-RT AI stack, they are effectively securing Ontario's industrial leadership in the global circular bioeconomy. We have just seen how incredibly fast tariffs and shifting regulations can squeeze a massive international supply chain. So I'll leave you with this. As global trade walls continue to close in everywhere, will this kind of Edge AI, explainable compliance become the ultimate survival tool for international logistics? It is definitely a fascinating look at how technology is adapting to global policy in real time. Thanks for joining me on this explainer today. I'll catch you on the next one.